If the United States leaves the game, what will Ukraine be left with and what will Putin get? This and other topics we will discuss right now. My name is Irina Uzlova, and today with us is UrielEpstein, Chief Executive Officer of the non-profit organization Real Democracy Initiative. Uriel, hello, glad to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Acting Deputy Permanent Representative of the United States to the United Nations, John Kelly, gave a fairly speech and also signaled in a very understandable cold tone that Russia will face consequences for refusing a peaceful settlement and all responsibility will lie with it. Kelly clarifies that the U.S. withdrawal from the negotiations, which may follow Russia's refusal, doesn't mean that the U.S. will abandon its principles and its friends. Let's listen to him.
We want an end to this war. As the first step on that path to peace, the United States put forward a proposal for an immediate, unconditional, and comprehensive ceasefire. Ukraine unequivocally accepted, pending Russia's agreement to do the same. Since then, we have been urging Russia to accept a ceasefire. Following President Trump's May 21 call with Russian President Putin, the Russian Federation is expected to provide a term sheet broadly outlining its vision for a ceasefire. We will judge Russia's seriousness towards ending the war not only by the contents of that term sheet, but more importantly, by Russia's actions. On that note, we condemn Russia's decision over the past weekend to launch some of the largest missiles and drone strikes against Ukraine since the beginning of the war. This disregard for human life does not demonstrate a desire for peace. It must cease. On the other hand, the recent agreement by both Russia and Ukraine to exchange 1,000 prisoners is an indication of what might be possible. If both Russia and Ukraine are truly interested in peace, the United States will work with both parties, with European partners, and with the United Nations to help achieve that goal, beginning with a meaningful ceasefire. But we will insist the discussion of peace by both sides must be undertaken in good faith. If Russia makes the wrong decision to continue this catastrophic war, the United States will have to consider stepping back from our negotiation efforts to end this conflict. To be clear, in doing so, we would not be abandoning our principles or our friends.
A very decisive statement. To what extent does it reflect Trump's position, and how realistic, how do you think, Uriel, and optimal is the U.S. withdrawal from the negotiation process, given that arms supplies to Ukraine as sanctions against Russia will remain in place?
It's empty words, completely empty words. They don't mean anything. It's unfortunate that I have to say that, but it's true. The fact is that John Kelly, who is the man speaking, is speaking in an acting capacity, and he has absolutely no power within this administration. He does not represent anyone, least of all the American president, Donald Trump. If we want to judge where we think the United States government will act, we cannot, unfortunately, look to words from acting representatives who have no political power, but rather to the American president himself, who in various posts on social media has made very clear that he does not see a real distinction between Zelensky and Trump and Putin. That he looks at them as equally responsible at best. In a recent Truth Social post, Trump said almost exactly that, where, yeah, he said that, Putin has lost his mind and that he knew Putin and that something has changed. Putin has changed. I'll set that aside. I can't believe anyone who, quote unquote, knew Putin could think that he suddenly now has changed when he's, of course, been the same dictator over the course of the last 20 years. But what's more important in that post is is the false equivalence that Trump creates, right? He says on the one hand that what Putin is doing by killing Ukrainian civilians is bad and that Putin has lost his mind. Okay, that's on the one hand. Then in the very next sentence, he says that likewise, he used the word likewise, what Zelensky says, that with every word out of Zelensky's mouth pisses him off and makes him angry, and that Zelensky should cut it out. And so essentially what he has done is he has created an equivalence between Zelensky saying things that he doesn't like and Putin killing countless Ukrainian civilians. And that is, of course, how Donald Trump thinks. And so anything and everything we may have just heard from Acting Representative John Kelly, unfortunately, I think it's not enough to take it with just a few grains of salt. I think we have to take it with an entire shaker full of salt.
It's a pity really to hear that it doesn't mean anything, but we believe that these points, like supporting Ukraine maybe by selling different weapons to us for money, Trump likes different deals, okay. We can agree with this. We can buy a weapon, not take it because United States can think about such principled positions, not about this Trump's administration and sanctions against Russia. Maybe they can even become stronger. We see such positions from Republican senators and not only from them.
Yeah, I mean, look, on the sanctions front, that's interesting. So I will say that while it is highly unlikely, unfortunately, for the United States to continue or increase any level of support directly for Ukraine that we've seen in the past, I do not discount the possibility of sanctions against Russia. Like that, I do think is a possibility. What you're referencing with about the possibility of Russian sanctions with support of Republican senators, there's a bill in the Senate which has, I believe, support of 81 senators. I think that's the right number, which is unprecedented bipartisanship in today's age. And it's led by Senator Lindsey Graham as one of the key sponsors. Unfortunately, though, again, we have not seen any movement along these lines in the House of Representatives. So Mike Johnson has not made any similar moves. And of course, we've not seen anything remotely resembling a willingness to exert true American power against Russia from the single most important branch as it relates to foreign policy, which is the executive, which Donald Trump leads. So unless we start seeing some backbone on the part of these senators and a willingness to call out the administration's weakness as it relates to Putin, I don't think we're going to see a lot of movement. And so my hope, what I think is not outside of the realm of the possible, is that as the big beautiful bill that Donald Trump likes to tout, the big spending bill, moves its way through the Senate, there's a possibility that some senators could try to leverage support for that bill in order to also get support for sanctions on Russia. There are senators, there are Republicans who still recognize America's responsibility to push back and to fight against our enemies while supporting our allies. And so my hope is that there is some possibility of increasing these sanctions and maybe perhaps even tying them to some of these other tariffs that President Trump seems to love so much.
The Atlantic writes, has Trump fallen out of love with Putin? The entourage of the US president confirms that he is furious, but still wants a deal with the Russian Federation. Donald Trump's relation with Vladimir Putin is described by the Atlantic as one of the longest and most significant geopolitical romances in recent years, one that has endured despite allegations of election meddling, a special counsel investigation, and the invasion of Ukraine. However, in recent weeks, signs of strain have begun to appear in this relationship, the authors of the publication state. So maybe has Trump fallen out of love with Putin? And can we really see these signs of strain which began to appear?
No, I don't think. Again, I'm sorry to be the pessimist here. Although I will say, it's amusing to hear the word bromance with the Ukrainian accent. But no, unfortunately, I don't think Trump has fallen out of love with Putin. I have seen no evidence of Trump's willingness to stand up to Putin. The only times we have seen Trump even remotely critical of Putin, right? Like that Truth Social post, it was followed almost immediately by an equally aggressive attack on Zelensky, again creating that false equivalence. And in fact, in the last sentence in that post, or maybe the second to last sentence in that post, he says that this is Zelensky's war, Putin's war, and Biden's war. But the first name that he wrote there was Zelensky. That it's Zelensky's war, and only then it's Putin's war. So in short, I do not think Trump has indicated that he is willing to show any real independence against Putin. I think there's an argument to be made that for, some of these statements that he's come out with recently, which have indicated some level of anger against Putin, perhaps that frustration is real, but that could also be a show. It could just be, him trying to demonstrate that he's not a complete, that he's not entirely enthralled to the Russian dictator by every so often saying something that's a little bit negative, so that when, we go on shows like this, there's this question of, has Trump fallen out of love? And then it becomes an open question, right? Well, maybe Trump is not so close to Putin as we think. But again, I don't think at this point there's any value in us trying to be overly optimistic. I think we should be realistic and recognize that Trump is very much aligned with Putin. And for whatever reason, he has said fewer negative things about Putin than he has said about literally any other world leader, especially leaders of democratic countries like Zelensky and the other leaders in Europe.
This is not the first time when Trump gives Putin some deadlines. 2 week, 2.5 week, 1.5 week, again 2 week, and again 2 week, like we joke, 2 or 3 weeks, yes, like we had by Arestovich some time ago. What kind of term is that? Why 2 weeks? And what does Donald Trump expect to see from the Russian dictator? Another massive attacks against Ukraine?
What I think Donald Trump expects to see from the Russian dictator is whatever it is that the Russian dictator wants him to see, wants to do. That's kind of it. So I'll remind you of another deadline that Trump gave before he was ever elected, which is that he would end this war in 24 hours. It wasn't even a 2-week deadline. It was a 24-hour deadline. Needless to say, it wasn't met. And what's so interesting about this is that if Putin were smarter, he would give Trump something, right? I mean, he would give him some indication that he's on board. And, he tried this over Easter, right? He did his 3-day ceasefire, which of course was never a real ceasefire, but, Trump touted it. Trump said, oh, look, my friend Putin, is interested in peace by announcing this 3-day Easter ceasefire. So again, I think Trump has said all of these times, Putin must meet with Zelensky in person in Turkey, right? And then in all caps, he said, Zelensky, get over to Turkey immediately and meet with Putin. So what does Zelensky do? He listens. He goes to Turkey and meets with Putin. Or rather, goes to Turkey and is ready to meet with Putin, I should say. Meanwhile, does Putin come to Turkey? Of course not. And Trump immediately backtracks and says, oh, well, that's no surprise. I didn't expect Putin to actually come. I mean, I was debating whether or not I should go. And then again, there's so many of these other instances where initially, Trump said, ceasefire, we must have a ceasefire. And then Putin said, no. Zelensky said yes. And so what does Trump say? Oh, well, okay, we don't actually need a ceasefire. That's okay. The two sides can negotiate amongst themselves. So in short, again, there's unfortunately no way to mince words here, which is that Donald Trump is not ready in any way, shape, or form to exert real pressure on Vladimir Putin in a way that would actually have a positive impact in this war. So far, the only side that I have seen Donald Trump exert pressure on is Ukraine and President Zelensky.
Russia is doing everything to make next meeting in Istanbul fruitless. To ensure that the next meeting between Ukraine and Russia in Istanbul is not a waste of time, it is necessary to understand its agenda and properly prepare for the negotiations. However, the Russian Federation is doing everything to make this meeting fruitless, according to our statement of the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. So, really, Uriel, how can we assess these next negotiations negotiations in Istanbul. Maybe it will be June 2nd, but do we see some sense of it? Russia cannot present their memorandums, and they cannot give any steps, clear steps before these negotiations. So what is the sense of it?
What's the point of these negotiations? The truth is that these negotiations are just a show. There is no real there's no likely outcome here. Donald Trump wants to show that he is some brilliant peacemaker, some brilliant deal maker, and so he's forcing these negotiations to move forward. Ukraine under President Zelensky has demonstrated willingness to basically go along with whatever Trump asks, because again, you have no choice. Ukraine has no choice. President Zelensky has no choice. I only wish that he had offered some more symbolic willingness to go along with Trump earlier on, right? I'm thinking back to that fight in the White House a few months ago. But in truth, President Zelensky now finds himself with no other options, and so he does the things that Trump asks. Meanwhile, Putin, perhaps deciding that he doesn't have to do anything in order for Trump to continue liking him, he doesn't do anything. He doesn't go himself to Turkey. He doesn't send anyone serious there, anyone with actual power, and so I don't expect the outcomes of those negotiations to be anything different from what the outcomes have been so far, which is to say, exactly nothing.
And this show is to this main actor, Donald Trump, and that's all. But there is a big difference, because Ukraine really wants strong and comprehensive peace and ceasefire, but Russia doesn't want anything except prolonging their war.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. I mean, so long as Putin thinks he has a chance of winning this thing, he's not going to do anything. And it makes sense, right? Like right now, Putin has no reason whatsoever to actually engage with these negotiations seriously. If Trump were an actually good deal maker, he would recognize that in any deal, you have to demonstrate a certain level of power and a certain level of coercion in order to ensure that the other side decides that it's in their interest to come to the table. Now, it's easy for Trump to intimidate, to coerce, to pressure Ukraine. That's easy, relatively easy to do, and he's doing it. It is much harder for him to do the same thing with Russia. And he, as we know, Donald Trump doesn't like to do particularly difficult things in that sense. So he's not exerting a lot of pressure on Russia. And again, just look at the people in Trump's inner circle, right? I mean, you've got Tucker Carlson, you've got Elon Musk, you've got David Sachs, you've got Tulsi Gabbard. All of these people are overtly pro-Russia. They repeat talking points from the Kremlin. They repeat almost verbatim some of the things that I see from Channel 1, Russia's primary propaganda channel. And so it's no surprise to me, unfortunately, that President Trump finds himself in kind of this pro-Russia bubble, unwilling to bring real pressure to bear. And the irony of all of this, right, what makes all of this ironic is that Donald Trump actually does have an opportunity, right? If he were willing to demonstrate to Putin that this is the best he will ever be able to do, that he will not be able to advance further, that if he steps one further inch ahead, then he will be hit with sanctions that are unprecedented in the history of humanity, I actually do think that Putin might be forced to come to the negotiating table. But Trump appears unwilling to exert any of these instruments of American power in order to coerce Putin to do what we, being the free world writ large, want him to do. And so the last thing I'll say on this is that the real relevance, the real power in this conflict from the side of freedom needs to come from other European states. With America essentially content to sit on the sidelines, we need to have Germany, France, the UK, Italy, I mean, all the other powers of the EU, plus the countries in Eastern Europe, all come together, and in a coordinated fashion, they need to do two things. They need to, number one, truly pressure Russia through sanctions and otherwise, which will be difficult. It'll be expensive, but it's an investment in their own future, in their own security, and it'll be a hell of a lot more expensive if they wait. And then number two, they need to stop with all of this kind of back and forth and, diplomatic dithering, and just give Ukraine additional weaponry, the weaponry that it needs to, number one, ensure that Russia is not able to advance a single additional inch, and then in an ideal case, start pushing Russia back so that Putin no longer believes that he has a chance to win this war.
Does the determination and actions of German leader Friedrich Merz tell us that Europe is ready to give us weapons and is ready to live and fight without Trump?
Yes and no. I think Friedrich Merz has indicated some element of interest, right? I mean, he has Germany has pushed forward and gotten rid of any and all restrictions on long-range firing using German weapons in Ukraine. Now, the interesting thing about this is that Germany doesn't actually have a lot of long-range weapons in Ukraine, right? France and the UK do. Storm Shadow and I forgot the name of the French long-range missile. They're in Ukraine, but the German long-range missile, the Taurus missile, ostensibly wasn't in Ukraine, and yet Germany nevertheless got rid of all long-range restrictions. So what that tells me is that, number one, there are some German long-range missiles in Ukraine, and number two, it tells me that it is distinctly possible that Germany either already has or soon will provide additional long-range weaponry, including Taurus missiles, to Ukraine, and they'll simply do that in secret without announcing it, which makes sense from the perspective of operational security. So the question that I have in my mind is not whether any one of these European countries is willing to support Ukraine individually. I think they are moving in that direction. I don't think they've arrived. I don't think they're there yet, but I do think they continue slowly to move in that direction. But then the second equally important question is, are they willing to do so in concert? Will they do it together as a united European continent? Because if you take all of the defense spending of individual European states and you add it together, it's an incredible number. It's actually that they're spending an incredible amount of money on defense. The problem is that because they're not united, there's an incredible amount of redundancy, right, and inefficiency in defense investments. And so that big number that you see when you take all these European countries together, in terms of its impact, it's uniquely inefficient. Meanwhile, on the Russian side, you have a much smaller number in defense spending, but because it's all united, it's all together, it's all well organized and essentially efficiently deployed, the impact of that lower number is much higher, and that is despite the fact that Russia, of course, is notoriously corrupt. And so where, Russia is more efficient by sort of bringing all of its defense spending together in a single whole, they, of course, lose a lot of efficiency by virtue of their corruption and so forth. Even then, they're still producing more artillery, more drones, etc., than I'm pretty sure almost all of Europe taken together. So in order for that dynamic, for that math to change, European nations don't only have to invest more in their defense as individual countries, but also to coordinate more with their neighbors so as to increase the efficiency of defense investment when taken across the European Union as a whole.
And we see that Keith Kellogg, special envoy of Donald Trump, almost lost again all all cards by United States side, because he told that, yes, we understand Russia and we can discuss non-expansion of NATO. For what such statements?
So that's one of the key problems, is that General Kellogg doesn't have power. So with this administration, unfortunately, much like, the old Kremlin watchers, during the Soviet times, you had those people who would watch the Kremlin and they would look, okay, who's sitting at the right hand of the dictator, who's sitting at the left hand, who's sitting where, who's in the room, who's not. And they would use that to try to read the tea leaves of who has power and who doesn't. Now, usually in America, you don't have to do that, right? We have formal positions. We have the National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And based on those positions, you know who has power over which issues. And of course, in any organization, there are going to be exceptions to that. But generally speaking, in America, there was predictability, and it didn't, you did not have to read the tea leaves like that. You could simply listen to statements from the people that all previous presidents said were responsible for those issues. I think with this administration, you're seeing that change. And now we do have to go back to that old Kremlin tactic of reading the tea leaves. And when we read the tea leaves, what I think we'll find is that General Kellogg is powerless, that he can say nice things and he can say things that we agree with and that we think are rational and reasonable. And then none of those things will come to fruition. Nobody will act on those things because he does not have access to the Oval Office, because he doesn't have the president's ear, because he's not the one actually running American foreign policy as it relates to Ukraine and Russia. Meanwhile, Steve Witkoff, who has absolutely no diplomatic experience, no military experience, no experience that would even be remotely relevant to this conflict at all, he's the one where power actually lies. He has influence. He's able to dictate terms from the American perspective, and he is able to speak with the voice of the American president. And that is massively dangerous, because you're talking about a guy, again, who has no foreign policy experience. You're talking about a guy who has clear sympathies with Putin. You're talking about someone who, in a recent meeting with Putin, there was a fascinating, some photos and video of that meeting where you have Steve Witkoff coming in, and then you have a woman coming to sit down next to him, and then he turns to the Russians. He turns to the Russians on the other side, and he says, "Oh, is this my translator?" Mm-hmm. Yes, that's your... Hold on. So you're telling me that the American negotiator is accepting a translator provided to him by the Russians? A translator who, upon further investigation, of course, is an FSB agent. And of course, that's not surprise. That's not a shock at all. That should be assumed. This idea that an American prominent envoy of this nature would allow a negotiator from the opposing side, from what essentially amounts to an adversarial nation, to be the one translating for him it's mind-blowing, it's amateurish, it's embarrassing. I've translated in a number of meetings, in a number of high-level formal meetings between English and Russian. First of all, it's not an easy thing to do. And second of all, there's so many nuances in translation, so many things that go beyond the exact word-for-word translation of what's being said, and into, the role of the translator isn't just to translate those words. It's also to convey nuance. It's to convey body language. It's to convey cultural relevance and so forth. They go beyond just that word-for-word translation. And so the fact that you had a Russian spy translating for the American envoy in charge of our position on this conflict, again, it just goes to show that the United States is not in a position right now, unfortunately, to actually drive this conflict to any sort of long-term just resolution. Not until we start seeing some significant changes, not just in the things that some people in the administration say, right? Because some people in the administration say good things, and some people in Congress say good things. But what we need to see is actual differences in behavior, right? We need to start seeing that the people who are saying the right things actually have relevant power. And unfortunately, as of now, I've seen just about no evidence of that.
A lot of problems and risks. Uriel, thank you very much. Thank you for your explanation, for your thoughts and opinion and position. Really, thank you. See you next week. Take care of yourself.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me on.
UrielEpstein, Chief Executive Officer of non-profit organization Renew Democracy Initiative. My name is Irina Uzlova. Guys, thank you for joining and watching us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel War and Politics 24, and see you later. Bye.